Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first episode of Color of Money, where I, your host, Grace Coughlin, left my small town in New Hampshire to travel across the country to interview and pull back the curtain on the lives and lessons learned by entrepreneurs to understand how to generate that first dollar. Super excited for our first guest today, so let's welcome him in. Hey, Sean, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Of course, we're so happy to have you here. Do you want to just give a little 30-second overview of who you are and what you do in the space?
Yeah, I've been a founder of tech companies for about 20 years. Includes Flurry, Outlier.ai, mostly the nexus of data and analytics and how using data to make decisions has changed the way businesses work. I've been very lucky to live through the dot-com bubble bursting, the rise of mobile computing, the rise of AI. In fact, I went to grad school for artificial intelligence 20 years ago. And we used to joke that the things we were researching would never be useful in our lifetimes. And here, 20 years later, you know what?
Yep.
Apparently it's all that matters. And so I've been very lucky to see a bunch of things happen. I've been lucky to be successful. These days, I mostly try to give back as an investor, an advisor, and a coach of the next generation of startup founders.
Awesome. Well, can't wait to dive more deep into that. Before we get started, I love to start my interviews with a little fast five to show some color in your life. So let's get started. What is your usual breakfast order?
Breakfast order. I do not go out for breakfast very often. I am not a morning person. I do have young children,
Yeah.
and they wake me up early. So I normally am eating like Cheerios or something for breakfast. But when I go out, Eggs Benedict is like one of my go-tos. But honestly, that's like once a year kind of situation.
Special occasions. Makes sense. If you could choose between flying and mind reading, what would you choose?
Oh, that's interesting. Oh, definitely flying. I feel like mind reading would be too invasive.
Yeah.
It'd be really hard. I mean, honestly, it's really probably better we don't know what everybody else is thinking. I think the world's a better place for that. Social media showed us if we get too far into people's heads, things get wacky. So flying for sure.
Totally. Agreed. What is the last gift you gave somebody?
The last gift I gave somebody. That is a good question. I mean, it was my daughter's birthday recently, and she got an iPad. So I guess that would qualify.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah. That's funny. Love that. And what is an unpopular opinion you have?
Oh, most of my opinions are unpopular, as you will find out. Let's see. What is the most unpopular opinion that I have? I think that the root of most conflict in business is bad expectation setting.
Okay.
I don't think it has anything to do with people and stuff. I think that people are just really bad at setting expectations. That is not true, by the way. I'm not saying like wars and conflicts are based on bad expectation setting. This is very specific at companies, but I think the root cause of almost all conflict at companies is bad expectation setting.
Interesting. Okay. And lastly, if you were an animal, what would you be?
Man, that is a good question. I don't know. I like climbing a lot, so maybe that would be like something in the ape family. Although it would be fun to fly, going back to that flying thing. So maybe an eagle. I'm going to go with eagle.
Okay, interesting. Great. Okay, so let's dive right into things. Just to kind of kick it off, I would love to just, hear your quote unquote like origin story. What got you interested in doing what you're doing today and what made you make that initial jump?
Well, so keep in mind, I was in college in the late 90s when the dot-com bubble was coming up. So everything was about technology. Everything was about startups. And so you coming up through that, it's hard not to get taken away by that kind of excitement. However, when I graduated from grad school, the dot-com bubble had burst, and it was the worst time in history to get a job in technology. 0 out of 10, do not recommend. It was horrible. For people that enter technology today, you have no idea how bad it was. It was just horrific. But I really liked a lot of different things. I like technology, right? I got my graduate research was in computer science and machine learning, but I always have loved art. I loved communications. I loved all these sorts of things. And what I found was there weren't a lot of jobs that let me do all the different things I wanted to do.
Interesting.
And being a founder is one of the few areas I found where I could do such a wide variety of things. I never got bored.
Yeah.
Because most jobs, if you get a job, they like want to hire you to do this and have you keep doing this over and over again. And that was, I mean, the second thing was I worked at a lot of companies that didn't treat their employees like people. They
Yeah.
treated you like I don't know, a widget where like your salary goes on one end and productivity comes out the other. I'm not really
Right.
sure. Just there wasn't a lot of treating me like a person, and I wanted to work somewhere like that. And I realized eventually that if I wanted to work somewhere like that, I was going to have to start it myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in an odd way, I didn't become a founder of companies to get rich or become powerful or whatever it is most people do. It's because I just wanted a better place to work, and if I was going to work there, I had to create it.
Totally. Can you talk a little bit about, the companies that you've created?
Yeah, so my first company is a company called Flurry. We started it in 2005, which is the pre-iPhone era. And we became one of the early pre-iPhone app companies that was quite
Got it.
successful. But I mean, it wasn't very successful. It was just the most
Yeah.
successful of a bunch of unsuccessful companies. But then the iPhone launched, and we were at ground zero of the mobile revolution. And Flurry became the largest analytics and ads platform for mobile apps. We sold that in
Amazing.
2014 to
Yeah.
Yahoo. And it was great. We got to see the entire universe. I mean, Flurry was tracking over 2 billion smartphones around the world. We had
Crazy.
over 2 million apps on the platform. It was really like having an inside seat to a revolution in technology.
Totally.
Um, and it was fun. It was a great ride. Took some time off, and then I started a company called Outlier.ai, which it was the innovator in the early area of what's now called automated analysis. So we used AI to look at large data sets, which most large companies have. I think
Mm-hmm.
of Nike and Capital One and Macy's and Celebrity Cruises. They have just mountains of data about consumers, but they don't know what they don't know, right?
Right.
Most software was designed to give you answers to questions, but if you don't know the question, you can't get the value. And that's what Outlier did, is it brought you questions. And it was
Mm-hmm.
very successful. We exited that one last year in 2022.
Got
And
it.
since then, I spent most of my time, again, about 10 years ago, I started doing a lot of coaching and advising and
Mm-hmm.
investing and trying to give back to the community. And
Yeah.
over the last year, I've had the luxury of doing nothing but, and it's been quite fun. So I've been investing and coaching and helping founders on their journeys. It's very rewarding because the industry's been good to me. And one thing I love about tech is that in most professions, if somebody does something for you, they expect something in return.
Hmm.
The great thing about the tech industry is people will help you for no reason, and a lot of it is
Totally.
because people helped me in my career, didn't ask for anything,
Right.
so I'm helping people and not asking for anything, and they'll go on and help more people, and it's fantastic,
Mm-hmm.
and it's very rare for those people who've never worked outside tech. You don't know how rough it is out there in most industries to get ahead.
Yeah. Well, it's so interesting. I talk to a lot of people and I ask them, like, do you have a specific mentor that you feel like has really guided you through your struggles and someone that you really feel like you can lean on? And it's so amazing that now you're doing exactly that. But is there anyone when you were first starting out that was kind of that person for you?
Not really in some ways. I think that the idea of like one mentor is kind of a
Mhm.
romanticized idea that
Yeah.
we got through books and movies. Nobody really has one. There's been lots of people in my career. In fact, I'm working on something new now with a partner named Mark Jacobson. And in the early days of my first company, he was great at helping me understand what I was doing and what I should
Totally.
be doing. And so I think over the years, if you're very lucky, you create an ecosystem around you of people to give you perspective. So even now when I'm a CEO coach, I'm not the only person that the CEO goes to.
Right.
They have me as their coach, but they have their executive team, they have their peers, they have people that they go to for advice, they might have a few
Mhm.
mentors. So it's more of a constant stream. But I'm curious, when you ask that question to people, has anybody ever said ChatGPT? Because I really feel like that's going to happen. People will be like,
No, they
"Who's your
haven't, but
mentor?"
that's
Oh, it's
very
AI.
interesting. Yeah. Yeah, no, I have not heard that one, but who knows if maybe in a couple of years that could totally be a possibility.
Oh, it
And
totally will be.
yeah,
Oh,
you
absolutely,
kind of
1,000%.
jumped into that with like the whole AI stuff, like you guys were doing that. You probably never imagined that this is where AI would be.
No, that's the weirdest part. Is so 20 years ago when I was in grad school, we saw all this happening. It's just that the
Yeah.
computing power was so primitive back then. It was so
Hmm.
difficult to see these things reaching the scale they are. A lot. There are some new, like the transformer architectures behind modern LLMs is new, but they're still built on neural networks. The neural network architectures we use, nothing's really changed that much in terms of the algorithms that we use. What's changed quite radically is the computing power we can put behind them. The idea that, I mean, 20 years ago, you're still using dial-up internet
Yeah.
access. For those of, by the way, for those people listening that were even around 20 years ago, I realize that that was a long time ago, right? Like, using dial-up internet access, where like if somebody picked up the phone in your house, your internet didn't work anymore. Like this was
Yeah.
the old days. And so there was no cloud computing, there was no cloud storage. Like these
Hmm.
things happened later. And really, what's unlocked AI, I think, is the fact that we had done all the theoretical work. I mean, the origins of AI was back in, I believe it was the late 70s. Like the
Right.
ideas that underlie a lot of our work have been around for so long and were so rigorously investigated that once we unlocked the tech capacity to run with them, the
Hmm.
floodgates open. And I think that's what we're seeing now.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy, especially since I just graduated high school, that being kind of integrated like ChatGPT and that whole concept towards like the end of my high school career, it was just like crazy to see what some
Well,
people.
and here's the question: Do you think that when you're my age,
Mhm.
kids will even go to high school anymore?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. Just I've like tested out, ChatGPT, just typing things in, and it's like it can write a whole essay for you if you want. It's like what is the point? Teach you anything you want, like so why have teachers? It's
I mean, so
interesting.
my wife is a high school math teacher, and there's a key
Hmm.
question. Like, when I was in high school, again, this was 20 something years ago.
Yeah.
Your homework was part of your grade, right? The
Right.
homework that you did and how it was graded was part of your grade. That's not true anymore because there's no way to know if you did the homework,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Hmm.
if you could have had ChatGPT write the essay, or you
Totally.
could have, yeah, I mean, there's many tools out there that will solve the math problems for you. So all
Yeah.
of a sudden, homework has a different meaning, and you can't use it to create grades anymore.
Hmm.
But at the same time, you imagine, let's say that we take that away, and so we grade kids on tests that they take. But when they get a job, they'll use the AI.
Exactly.
So should we be testing them on how good they are at using the AI, and or is it important to understand the fundamentals so that you can understand what the AI is doing? It's a
Hmm.
fascinating question. I don't have a good answer. I will say that
Yeah.
having studied computer science and got my graduate degree and everything, you have
Hmm.
to learn everything from the ground up, everything
Right.
from the bits and bytes and the computer hardware architecture. And knowing those things does help you write software
Hmm.
and build products.
Yep.
But the problem is, as we get farther and farther up, as we create more and more layers of our tech stack, I'm
Hmm.
not sure that will always be true. I'm not sure if knowing, how computer architectures work will matter so much at the
Yeah.
level that we're really trying to coordinate AI systems, which are so many levels removed from that.
Yeah.
The future is gonna be weird. That's all
Very
I know. It's gonna be
unpredictable. Yeah.
weird.
Yeah. No, it's very interesting to think about, and I think it's a very interesting take because I haven't really had anybody that I've talked to, talk about AI so much. But it's everywhere, and I think
It's
it's
well,
something that needs
it's a
to be talked
problem
about.
too.
Yeah.
So I'll give you an example here. I do a lot of, as I'm helping companies, I do a lot of user research. Which means I
Hmm.
interview a ton of people about products and markets, and I used to hate user research because you
Yeah.
do dozens, hundreds of interviews, and then I have dozens of it, and I have to go like through and try to like extract the key points, and
Yeah.
that part is like
The pain.
horribly monotonous.
Yeah.
But these days, I do a customer interview. AI generates a transcript. I
Yep.
feed it into one of the LLMs. It spits out a summary. It is the most painless thing ever. And
Totally.
it means that I love user research now. But here's the problem: it used to be you got your start in user research by being the more junior person who would
Right.
read through all the transcripts and do all the summarization. So what happens when all of the entry level jobs are gone because AI is doing them? How do you get your start in these industries? You can't just jump in at the top. You haven't learned how to
Right.
do it. I don't know how that will play out. I do not envy people who are going to enter the workforce in 5, 10 years when entry level jobs as we know them start to
Totally.
evaporate. It's like
Yeah.
that joke where they say like entry level job, 5 to 10 years experience required. Like it's
Yeah.
gonna be crazy.
Right. Yeah, I really don't know. It will be, and I hope that I'm around to, see what happens with it all because it's very unpredictable.
But it's exciting, I'll say. I mean, the
Yeah.
world
Mhm.
is. You have to remember when I was a kid, we didn't even have the internet. Right? Our
Yeah,
phones had wires attached to them.
that's crazy.
It was bonkers. Like if you wanted to meet up with somebody somewhere, you had to agree ahead of time on the time and
Right.
place because it wasn't like you call their cell and ask them how far away they were.
Yeah.
And the fact that these things are so ingrained in our lives now. I mean, I don't
Mhm.
go anywhere without my phone,
Right.
right? I don't call. Nobody calls me
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah.
Like without me expecting them to call me,
Yeah.
like they'll text me or they'll message me or something. the world's changed so much just in the
Totally.
last 20 years. I can only imagine 20 years from now, it'll be crazy.
It will be. It will be. Well, kind of just switching gears a little bit, I would love to just get your takes on. I know, so you've started these two companies, right? From the
Mhm.
first and then to the second, were there any things that when you were starting your second company that you were like, these are things that I know I want to change that I didn't know jumping into this originally when starting my first company?
So I did a lot of things correctly the first time by accident,
Yeah.
or
Okay.
like maybe by accident's the wrong way. I wouldn't have been able to explain to you why I did them. Like
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you an example. So when I was growing, I grew up in New York. It was a very diverse place, and I moved out to California, and I was in a bunch of situations where I was like, it was full of white dudes, and it was very uncomfortable for me. And I
Mm-hmm.
probably couldn't have explained why that was the case.
Mm-hmm.
But my first company, we built a very diverse team because that was the environment I felt most comfortable in.
Totally.
And we definitely were a higher performing team. So I couldn't have told you why it was a good business decision
Mm-hmm.
to have a highly diverse team.
Right.
But by my second company, I could tell you that highly diverse teams are more
Yeah.
robust. They have
Mm-hmm.
better communication. They're more resilient. They also are more creative because they generate a lot more ideas from people with lots of different life experience.
Mm-hmm.
So I couldn't have told you why that was the right thing to do the first
Yeah.
time. I could tell you the second time around why it was the right thing to do. The other major difference is that the way I tell people about starting companies, the first time you start your first company, it's like the first time you go on a roller coaster, right? Like a big
Yeah.
roller coaster. Like you're white knuckling it the entire time. You're
I love
scared to
that.
death
Yeah.
because you have no idea when to be scared. So you're just scared the whole time.
Right.
Now, the second time you go on that same roller coaster, you know when to be scared. So most
Mm-hmm.
of the time, you're just enjoying the ride. But when
Totally.
you know to be scared, you are more scared than you were the first time because you know it's coming,
Yeah.
right? That's what being a repeat founder is like. And it means that a second time around, it's easier to enjoy the journey,
Yeah.
but the journey is more stressful. Like the peaks and valleys are more severe than they are the
Mm-hmm.
first time. The peaks and valleys is always a problem in startups. Hey, I'm going to take over the world. Oh my God, we can't possibly succeed. Oh my God, we'll be the next Apple. Oh my God, how am I going to pay rent next month? Like this is
Yeah.
the startup journey is like that. If the second time around, these peaks and valleys don't happen as fast, but they are much more exaggerated. The
Totally.
peaks are a lot higher and the troughs are a lot lower.
Mm-hmm.
And so dealing with that and finding a way to deal with the stress of that up and down is one of the hardest things to do as a founder. And as a second time founder, you think you'd be better at it. And in fact,
Mm-hmm.
it's not necessarily the case because again, it's a different, more severe problem.
Right.
If anything, what happens is the people who can't deal with it get filtered out and they just don't do it again.
Mm-hmm.
But it's tough. It's
Yeah.
tough. I mean, I did lots of other stuff too, but the other problem is if you start a company like Flurry was a very successful business, which I'm very happy
Totally.
with. It was 10 years of my life, right?
Mm-hmm.
10 years, things change a lot. Like
Yeah.
when we started Flurry, there was no Amazon Web Services. There was no iPhones. Like these things didn't exist. Y Combinator had literally just gotten started. It had not gotten started yet, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And so now, when I was starting Outlier in 2015, just how you build companies had changed.
So much. Yeah.
Everything was different.
Mm-hmm.
Everything had changed. Like our
Right.
Series A for Flurry, as an example, which we closed in 2006, 2007, I can't remember. I think it was
Mm-hmm.
January 2007, was $4 million. It was Series A round, right?
Jeez.
These days, that's like a small seed round,
Yeah.
right? Like the world is just very different as it
Mm-hmm.
used to be. So by what I mean is the second time you're starting a company, the world's changed. Who cares what it was
Right.
like
You
the
have
first
to
time?
adjust.
That
Yeah.
that
You don't know.
experience isn't relevant anymore. Let's go
Mm-hmm.
learn it again. Let's get back
Yeah.
on the bike. And it requires a certain kind of beginner's mindset and humbleness to get on there and realize you don't know what you're doing. There are many repeat founders who try to force it to work the way it did last time.
Right.
And it ends up being a disaster because the world has moved on.
Right. Yeah. No, that's very interesting. You have to adjust at all times. Technology is just moving like that, left and right, and that's an interesting viewpoint because just because you had the experience doesn't mean it would apply the second time around.
Yeah. I mean, here's a great example. My first company, e-signatures didn't exist. You had to sign pieces of paper physically. When we
Right.
close our first round of financing, you go to a lawyer's office, and there's a huge long conference table covered in paper you have to sign.
Mm-hmm.
These days, you spend 30 seconds clicking a few buttons
Right.
and you just signed everything. It's just things change. And so who knows 10 years from now what it'll be like starting
Yeah.
a company with AI tools doing this and that. And the other problem is there are more startups today than there were back then, right?
Hmm.
And when I was starting Flurry, it was still the rubble of the dot-com bubble having bursted. During the dot-com bubble, there was a ton of startups, but then the industry imploded, people walked away, it was radioactive, they didn't want to touch it. Today, there's orders of magnitude more startups, which means there's orders of magnitude more competition. If you want to build a tech business, there's just a lot more people vying for that. So the hard part now, back then, it was really hard. Can you set up a website? Which
Yeah.
sounds hilarious because we can set up a website in 10 seconds right now, but it's
Yeah.
really hard to set up a website. That's no longer a barrier. And so the barrier
Right.
right now is how can you stand out among the noise, the cacophony of other startups? And so it's just a different problem.
Totally. No, very, very interesting things that you're saying. It's great. Kind of switching gears again, just a little bit, and just to kind of talk about this work-life balance. I feel like with a lot of people, they're either like, oh yeah, like I have like all this time, like it's fine, like I can do both, or they're like, no, like work, 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 like that is not attainable. I would love to just hear your thoughts on it, because obviously you were at school, then with Flurry, which was 10 years you said of your life. So do you feel like that is attainable for people, or it really just
Oh
depends?
yeah, Flurry was 10 years of my life. Outlier was 7 years. I mean, spent most of the last 20 years as a founder,
Yeah.
CEO of some form or another. I think the whole work-life balance is a very there's no question. It's a very weird framing because there are people who want to work 24/7,
Right.
and that's fine. And that's good. And some people can do that and find success. There's other people where you want to have more balance, you want
Hmm.
more creativity, you want to have friends and a support system. And
Hmm.
if you don't have those, you can't be your best.
Yeah.
It's a little bit like the work from home debate where there are companies who
Mhm.
need to be in the office and
Right.
there's companies who can work from home.
Mhm.
And there's no right answer. I think the key question is deciding for yourself what your journey needs to be like and not trying to aspire to being like someone else. I
Mhm.
can't tell you how many people I meet are aspiring to be like Steve Jobs. They want to build their company like the way Steve
Yeah.
Jobs built Apple. And nobody will ever build a company like Steve Jobs built
Yeah.
Apple because it was a combination of his experience, the team around him that he built, the time that he was building it, the kind of product,
Yeah.
the ways they got lucky. Because by the
Mhm.
way, they got lucky just like everybody else has to get lucky. And so I don't think there is an answer. Can you build a startup company working 9 to 5? You
Mhm.
can,
Yeah.
absolutely. It's absolutely possible. Are you more likely to be successful the more you work? I mean, it depends on a
Yeah.
lot of different stuff. I mean, it's really hard to make generalizations about these things. I will tell you my personal experience is
Mhm.
that I usually work a lot, but I think that for me, making sure I have space for my family and everything is
Yeah.
important to deal with that stress.
Mhm.
But one thing that's true, it doesn't matter how long you're at your computer working or not. If you're a founder and a CEO, you can never really let go of the specter of the business, like a
Right.
dark cloud hanging over you. So
Mhm.
whether or not you're working really hard or you're at the playground with your kids or whatever you're doing, it's there. And it's
Right.
a very difficult thing to deal with because it's irrelevant. It doesn't matter how much you're working. Some people work to try to make it go away and it doesn't help.
Mhm.
Some people try to go on vacations and make it go away. It doesn't really help. It's just there.
Yeah.
And I actually, I work with a lot of CEOs from the very early stages up to the pre-IPO public companies. And all of them, at least part of them, daydream about walking away,
Yeah.
about just giving it all up because what would it be like if that dark cloud wasn't over me all the time anymore? Like, what
Mm.
would the sun really come through? And the answer for some of them is they probably would be happier, and the answer for others is they probably would be miserable because
Mhm.
that cloud is what motivates them to be their best. But that's actually a bigger problem for CEOs is the mental health challenges rather than the hours you work or whether or not you're working from home. It's can you deal
Mhm.
with that dark cloud? And many people cannot. And you look at the incidence of mental illness and mental health crises and issues among founders, and it really, in my opinion,
Mhm.
comes down to that.
Yeah. No, that's a very interesting point you give up. I mean, you bring up. Is there anything that you feel like you personally do if you're having a tough day, or you feel like nothing's going your way, that you just need to clear your head?
I think for everybody it's different. The three things that I've always done being in the hot seat. If you're the founder CEO, you're in the hot seat, right? Like
Yeah.
it's always the case. The three things I've done, one is I always have interests outside of work.
Yeah.
And for me, those interests are typically art oriented, mostly
Okay.
because often as a CEO, you don't feel like you're in control. Things are happening to you a lot. But
Yeah.
the great thing about art is like you sit down and let's say you're illustrating, or I used to be a ceramic artist, you're sitting down there, you control the entire world in front of you,
Totally.
right? You have absolute and total control over whatever this piece is you're going to create.
Hmm.
And that helps a little bit. The
Yeah.
second thing you can do is make sure you have a good support network. And
Hmm.
surprisingly, usually your friends and family are not a good support network because they have no idea what you're going through.
Right.
They can empathize with you and they feel
Mhm.
and sympathize with you, but they don't really understand it. So I've always sought out creating CEO peer groups, right? People at the same stage
Interesting.
as me, where you
Hmm.
can sit down and have honest conversations, not because they will solve your problems,
Yeah,
just so
but they
you can
relate to
talk
you.
about your problems and
Yeah,
realize you're not the only one who has them.
totally.
One of the ways I was able to survive the pandemic lockdowns as a CEO was
Mhm.
I had a peer group and we just sat down and we're like, this is hard.
Yeah,
Like, what do we
yeah.
do?
Mhm.
And just knowing that you weren't the only one was important. And I think the third thing is that it's really important to understand what makes you happy,
Mhm.
right? I think a lot of people get into the startup game and they think that there's this thing they're supposed to be like, I need to be like Steve Jobs, and the job requires me to do these things that I hate, but I have to do them because that's
Mhm.
the job. And people,
Right.
there's this weird thing of depriving themselves of joy. And here's a basic example. Like
Mhm.
I've always been a product person. I love the product creation process.
Yeah.
And you could argue a CEO of a somewhat large company shouldn't be spending their time writing product specs and designing product stuff. Like it's not a good use of their time. And my response was, those are the things that give me energy. That makes me happy. And if I'm happy, I'll do my job better. So I should absolutely make time for them. It shouldn't be most of my time. It shouldn't even be a
Mhm.
large percentage of my time. But
Yeah.
if that's what I enjoy, I should be able to do those things to make sure I never lose my enjoyment of this company and this job and these people and everything. But there's a shocking number of CEOs I work with that actively deprive themselves of the things they enjoy because they think they're
Mhm.
not supposed to do them, that that's not what a
Right.
CEO does.
Mhm.
My favorite example of this, and I have a lot of it, like Lou Cerny, who started New Relic, which is
Mhm.
went public as the largest APM company, recently got acquired. But he used to spend 2 weeks every quarter coding because he loved
Mhm.
coding. It's what made him
Yeah.
happy. And everybody used to look at it horrified. A CEO of a public company shouldn't be coding. And
Mhm.
my response was, I mean, honestly, if that's what made him happy, then that's cool. That's
Yeah.
what that's what it takes to do your job well. Then why are we looking down on that? Why are we superimposing our idea of
Yeah.
how you should be a CEO on someone who's figured it out, obviously?
Right. Yeah. Very, very interesting. And I feel like it's also the fact that, like, as a CEO, you wear many hats, right? You're not just like dedicated to one thing. Like you are doing a lot, especially at the beginning. So I feel like
Well, at the
having this.
beginning, that's true. Later on, actually, is less true. What ends up happening is the problem with being a CEO, why it's so stressful, is you don't have a lot of levers. You have all the responsibility and very little ability to act on it, right? So, as a CEO,
Yeah.
what can you actually do? You
Right.
can fire people and you can hire people. It's kind of
Yeah.
a very big lever, right? To change. You can shift your product strategy,
Hmm.
but that's another big lever because it would take
Yeah.
however long to shift that. You
Hmm.
can do things like raise money or sell the company. Again, it's a big lever. You have a bunch of very big levers.
Hmm.
And the problem is a lot of your problems are not very well addressed by any of those big levers.
Right.
It's like that. I don't know I don't know if people still play at those claw games where the claw's going to come down and supposed to grab something.
Oh
It's almost
yeah.
impossible to grab something.
Yeah.
Being a CEO feels like that a lot. You have this
Hmm.
claw, so theoretically it should be easy to go pick that up and bring it over. And it's like, oh my God, this is impossible because the
Hmm.
claw is poorly designed for the task. And that's, as a CEO, you have a bunch of those claws, and they're very poorly designed for what you need to do, but that's what you have, and you do the best you can with what you got.
Totally. I agree. I agree. So kind of just wrapping things up here. I would love to, I'm 18. I'm trying to start my startup and
Never
everything.
get older. My official advice: stay 18. Don't get older.
I'll try. I'll try. What would be the biggest piece of advice to first time founders that you would give?
I think a lot of people right now jump into being a founder without having worked anywhere before. And I think the problem with that is that if you've never worked anywhere and seen what it's like to be an employee and how businesses work and what doesn't work about them, it's very hard to create one that's functional and
Yeah.
healthy. And we romanticize the Mark Zuckerbergs and people who dropped out of college to start companies, but the number of people who can do that and be successful are very low.
Yeah.
I think that there is a lot to be said, and I'm not saying you have to work for 10 to 15 years
Yeah.
to be ready, but working somewhere and learning about how these companies do it wrong and why do employees like their jobs? Why do they not like their jobs? How do you get things done? I learned a lot in my first job that made me a better
Mhm.
founder.
Yeah.
Because I worry a lot of the startup companies we see in tech are run like fraternities and sororities because those are the largest organization a lot of these people have ever been part of.
Yeah.
And this is not a criticism. I mean, if it's the biggest, if that's what you know, you use what you know, and if you've never had a
Right.
job at a company, you've never seen how they work, you don't have a tool set. And by the way, what you often do is end up making the same mistakes that made those big companies horrible places to work at.
Yep.
So trying to get a diverse amount of experience. The best advice that was given to me was you want to get a job where you don't know what you'll be doing in 6 months. You don't
Mhm.
want to join a company that has like a new hire training program, onboarding program. You don't want to get a job where it's on rails. You want to jump into a team where you don't know you'll be doing 6 months, and the only thing that throttles your success is your ability, your talent,
Mhm.
how well you can do. And the minute that environment is not like that anymore, go find another one or
Mhm.
start your own company at that point or whatever you've learned. It's just put yourself in a position that you're the only thing holding back how fast you can move. I have friends, I mean, I'm in my 40s now. I have friends who've only just gotten to the point where they feel like they're getting into positions of leadership,
Yeah.
right? They only feel like right now their careers have kind of gotten started. I
Mhm.
mean, that's depressing,
Yeah.
right? Like, come
Mhm.
on,
Right.
that's really sad to think that would
Yeah.
be the case.
Yeah.
Like, life is too short for that.
Totally.
Because at some point, what ends up happening is you realize when you're young and you have potential, the more you do, the more doors in your life will open up, the more
Right.
paths you have. There's a point where it comes at you surprisingly fast, where you start to realize you're no longer a young person with potential anymore,
Mhm.
and those doors started to close. And you often realize that after those doors have started to close, and you
Mhm.
start to panic
Right.
because this is a new world. Which doors do you want to stay open? So you get to my stage of my career, I have to think a lot about what doors I want to be open in 10 years because I'm not a young person with potential anymore. People don't see me that way. And that transition always comes at you really fast.
Yeah.
So that's the best I can do. Honestly,
Yeah.
have fun, enjoy life, don't be miserable. People tell you to be
Mhm.
miserable to be successful. I don't think that's true, but
Mhm.
acknowledge that luck is a big part of it.
Mhm.
Like, I don't know. I feel like too much we read these books about people. We think they're successful because they're geniuses or they worked really hard. Or
Mhm.
I've been very lucky. If you
Yeah.
look at all of my startups and all the success I've had, you can trace it back to a few moments where it was just luck. And
Mhm.
yes, did we work hard to put ourselves in a position to get lucky? Absolutely. But there's many
Mhm.
people who worked just as hard to get in just the same position did not get lucky.
Yep.
And so if at some point if it's come down to luck, I mean, we can't take it too seriously. I mean,
Right.
it's a point where, I mean, let's see what happens. Let's go
Yeah.
for it. But if we don't enjoy ourselves, it's certainly not worth it.
Totally. I totally agree. Well, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for coming on today. It was great to talk to you, and I hope you had some fun as well.
Yeah, yeah, no, thanks for having me. It was good times. By the way, everything I said, ravings of a madman. Do not listen to it. Do something else.